The massive success of The Dark Knight, with a dominant showing at the international box office and its DVD release being one of the top 5 best-selling DVDs of all time, along with the overwhelmingly positive critical reception, allowed Nolan the opportunity to finish off his trilogy. It also allowed him to do so on his terms, which meant a break to work on a different film. This break would give his team the required time to perfect their plan. In the time following the release of The Dark Knight, Nolan worked on an original project, the science fiction action film Inception, which was released on July 16, 2010. The film was another commercial and critical success for Nolan as he continued to develop his action filmmaking style. The years between the releases of the second and third entry of the Dark Knight trilogy would not be a dead period for Batman, however, as a monumental piece of Batman media would further cement his status as a cultural icon. The release of Batman Arkham Asylum on August 25, 2009 was a transformative moment in the history of superhero video games. The video game received universal praise from critics, eye-popping sales numbers, and extremely positive fan response, which gave the game a place amongst the best games of the 7th console generation. The game was written by Paul Dini, one of the writers for Batman the Animated Series, and was developed by Rocksteady Studios. The game's huge success led to a sequel, Batman Arkham City, which was released on October 18, 2011. Arkham City built on the success of Asylum and expanded the scope of the gameplay, with Rocksteady Studios' work once again garnering rave reviews and selling lots and lots of copies. The game's success would complement the success of Nolan's films and would provide Batman fans with an overabundance of excellent media depicting the adventures of the Caped Crusader. It would also help fans by distracting them from their mounting anticipation for a finale. That finale would continue to expand its scope in search of the peak of action filmmaking. Christopher Nolan would again work alongside his brother Jonathan on writing the screenplay, based on a story he worked on with David S. Goyer. The film would introduce Bane and Catwoman while also tackling new themes such as class divide, populism, and revolutionary politics. These themes would serve as a reflection on an ever-increasingly divided United States and as a backdrop to a refocus on Bruce Wayne as the center of the story. After Harvey Dent's psychological transformation took center stage in the narrative of The Dark Knight, Bruce Wayne's struggle to cope with the ending to the previous film drives forward the narrative. The Nolan brothers placed the previous film's ending under the microscope, examining the consequences of the actions that were chosen by Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne. Choosing a noble lie to win against the Joker and organized crime has left Wayne and Gordon unable to move on. This inability to move on from Gotham, from his trauma, and from his decision to let Batman take the fall for Dent's crimes has forced Wayne to hermetically seal himself off from the world. His body is bruised from years of crime fighting, and his mind seems to be stuck in repetitive patterns. Bruce's deep psychological need for Batman to prove himself to his dead father mirrors the need that Gotham City has for Batman as a symbol of hope. This emphasis on Bruce Wayne and his psychological state mirrors Batman Begins, with the journey he went on in that film now needing to lead to a final resolution for his deep wounds. He must move on from Gotham, from Batman, to ever live a happy life. This mirroring of Begins is done in more than just this emphasis, with lots of elements of the third film matching the first film in tone, style, themes, and narrative threads. David S. Goyer and the Nolan brothers deliberately called back to Begins as a way of wrapping up the narrative in a cohesive manner. The Dark Knight's obsessions and focus are moved away from in favor of crafting a satisfying conclusion for the trilogy. To realize this story, Christopher Nolan would bring the team back together. He would produce the film along with his wife Emma Thomas and Charles Roven. Wally Pfister would return as cinematographer, with Lee Smith returning as editor and Nathan Crawley returning as production designer. To assist Crawley, Kevin Kavanagh was brought in as an additional production designer. Hans Zimmer would return to score the film without assistance from James Newton Howard for this film, who felt that he would now serve as a third wheel to the working relationship between Nolan and Zimmer, which was further developed in Inception. The cast would see returning stars Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, Gary Oldman, and Nestor Carbonell. They would be joined with new faces, Tom Hardy, who would depict Bane, Anne Hathaway, who would play Catwoman, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Marion Cotillard also joining the cast. This would continue the series' tradition of featuring an all-star cast. The team would have a large budget to play with once again, enabling them to continue pushing the boundaries of large-budget action blockbuster filmmaking. The estimated budget for The Dark Knight Rises was over $250 million, the largest of the trilogy. This budget would enable Nolan to continue his push of IMAX cameras and his philosophy of practical effects over CGI to the limits. Lots of filmmakers discuss their preference for using practical effects over CGI, but Nolan and his team were truly able to push this to a point rarely if ever seen in the history of filmmaking. This would be seen with the new vehicle for the film, the Bat, which was actually built, but just couldn't actually fly, in the final fight scene between Bane and Batman, featuring thousands of extras all executing a massively complex, choreographed fight sequence. The benefit of having such a large budget is in how many tops of their profession creatives can be brought together to realize Nolan's vision. The practical sets themselves, including several extraordinary vertical sets such as Bane's lair, showcases the commitment to perfecting the extremely precise details in a way we rarely get to see in CGI-heavy blockbusters. The film was given this large of a budget in anticipation of bringing in an enormous haul at the box office and through home video. The Dark Knight Rises was released on July 20th, 2012. However, this release was marred by a horrific tragedy that has become all too common in the United States. During a midnight screening of the film at the Century 16 Cinema in Aurora, Colorado, James Egan Holmes entered the screening and opened fire on the audience, killing 12 people and leaving 58 others injured. This horrible tragedy dampened what should have been a celebration of the wrapping up of an iconic trilogy. Christopher Nolan released a statement on the senseless tragedy stating, quote, "I would not presume to know anything about the victims of the shooting, but that they were there last night to watch a movie. I believe movies are one of the great American art forms, and the shared experience of watching a story unfold on screen is an important and joyful pastime. The movie theater is my home, and the idea that someone would violate that innocent and hopeful place in such an unbearably savage way is devastating to me. Nothing any of us can say could ever adequately express our feelings for the innocent victims of this appalling crime, but our thoughts are with them and their families." End quote. This was such a horrifying and appalling event. It is also weird to remember an era when these shootings used to actually have a serious effect on the public consciousness and stay in the news cycle for much longer, with so many mass shootings in the United States now that each new one serves for most as a numb reminder of the violence that can erupt at any moment. It's hard to find a way to properly transition from such a somber topic, with the tragic shooting having left an indelible mark on the release of the film. The shooting seemed at first to potentially dampen some excitement to see the film, but the film was able to see continued success despite that. The film earned over $1.1 billion at the international box office, and despite the slowly eroding home video market, Dark Knight Rises was able to earn over $158 million through its home video release. The film once again received overwhelmingly positive critical reception, with Roger Ebert again stating his love for Nolan's trilogy. Quote, "The film begins slowly with a murky plot and too many new characters, but builds to a sensational climax." End quote. There were criticisms leveled at the film, with some attacking the film for its perceived political leanings. David Sirota, a progressive political commentator who would go on to serve as a speechwriter and senior advisor on Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, as well as be nominated for an Academy Award for his work on the screenplay for Don't Look Up, condemned the film's politics. He situated the film alongside Call of Duty Black Ops 2, which was co-written by David S. Goyer, as anti-populist pieces of mass media that were paralleling the supposed conservative messaging of 1980s movies. Sirota stated, quote, "When villainous motives and psychopathy is televisively ascribed to mass popular outrage against the economic status quo, it suggests to the audience that only crazy people would sympathize with such outrage. Knowing the teenage audience is right now forming the next generation's visions of good and bad, it's a message that the 1% must love." End quote. He also accused the film of, quote, "not so subtly reflecting the Tea Party's rhetorical backlash to the powerful Occupy Wall Street zeitgeist." End quote. The article was published before the film was released and before Sirota had even seen it. But of course, why would anyone let that ever get in the way of writing an entire article on the film's politics? Catherine Short, a film critic, took this same line against the film with her article in The Guardian, stating that the film, quote, "is a quite audaciously capitalist vision, radically conservative, radically vigilante, that advances a serious, stirring proposal that the wish fulfillment of the wealthy is to be championed if they say they want to do good. Mitt Romney will be thrilled. What's strange is that quite so many of the rest of us seem to want to buy into it." End quote. These critiques, of course, come out of a specific cultural moment into which Nolan's film is reflecting. The Occupy Wall Street movement that occurred in 2011, which had served as a left-wing populist upswell, was one of two major populist movements of that era, with a counterbalance of sorts found in the right-wing backlash to the election of Barack Obama, the Tea Party movement, which started in 2009. Nolan's film deals more with the Occupy Wall Street movement in the way it depicts its faux populist revolution, which opened itself up to these types of critiques, with Nolan's work to this day still dealing with accusations of supposedly right-wing sympathies. I will address these critiques in my analysis of the film's themes a bit later in this video. With that context being laid out, let's explore The Dark Knight Rises. It's been tough for me to untangle all my thoughts surrounding the film, with its audacious style resonating strongly while other aspects of the film threaten to drag it down. Nolan demonstrates a willingness with this film to get weirder than he ever has before, while still maintaining his strict adherence to his philosophy of making everything feel grounded and realistic with his use of practical effects. He pushes the boundaries of his storytelling into new and exciting avenues. While I admire the chances he takes with the material, I do. He misfired in one key way. The Talia al Ghul twist is both a weak twist and recontextualizes the film with a less interesting villain at its core. This is one of my major problems with the film. The twist at the end feels completely unnecessary, and her whole character feels like a tacked-on addition to tie everything together. Nolan's strong desire to create a parallel with Batman Begins, I think, is the culprit for this less interesting narrative decision. I would have preferred she just not be in the film at all, with Bane serving as the man behind it all, with his backstory of being kicked out of the League of Shadows being left mysterious. However, Nolan chooses to over-explain and unnecessarily connect the trilogy in a way that is disappointing, as so much of the film chooses interesting, exciting, and just straight-up weird paths to take the narrative. That being said, however, I do appreciate Nolan taking so many chances with this film. I find that the experimental nature of several aspects of the film land very well. Zimmer's soundtrack feels like a top-of-the-line composer who's been fully unleashed. The use of IMAX is immaculate, with the action set pieces Nolan brings to the screen providing some truly spectacular moments, with the plane sequence at the beginning being so awesome. Tom Hardy's performance is one that I feel is truly iconic. Yes, the voice has been satirized and mocked countless times, but this is only because of how unique it truly is. He is a badass villain in this film. Yes, the film is bloated, with too many characters and narrative threads to follow, an unsatisfying twist, and an uncompelling villain in Talia al Ghul. But the film also has a great core of awesome action scenes and a surprisingly strong emotional core. That emotional center, which is provided by Bruce Wayne and Alfred, along with at times Selina Kyle, is the best executed emotional core for any film in the trilogy. Speaking of Selena Kyle, Anne Hathaway gives a great performance as Catwoman. Each subsequent rewatch of this film only further entrenches my opinion that her Catwoman is immensely underrated. While I still prefer Pfeiffer's version, Hathaway brings a real sense of depth and character to her role, providing a good counter to Bruce Wayne's philosophy without fully giving in to evil. The film's story looks at all sorts of themes in a way that takes a lot of the character concerns from Batman Begins and brings them back to the forefront. Why is Bruce Wayne doing this? When can he stop? Does Gotham need Batman more than Bruce Wayne needs him? These types of questions are examined in detail. Bruce Wayne's evolution in this film finally puts to rest his demons, at least for now, in favor of living a normal life. He finally sees the damage he is doing not only to himself, but to those he loves, such as Alfred, by continuing to do what he does. These psychological concerns are then put against the backdrop of a pseudo-populist revolution in the image of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Like with The Dark Knight, I believe Nolan is not necessarily tipping his hand one way or another, at least not intentionally. He is attempting to use those socio-political elements as set dressing, as a way of raising the stakes of the battles that Batman is fighting, with the lies that helped bring peace to Gotham now being exposed, and the elite being killed off in a brutal campaign. The idea that the film is condemning the Occupy movement, I think, is reductive and misses the larger points of the narrative, which is that populist politics, which I think is the real core of Nolan's anxieties, is easily manipulated. Nolan is attempting to showcase the ways that this form of politics can be weaponized for a strong man to take over in favor of his own insidious agenda, regardless of the specific political alignment of his public posturing. The film showcases both the insidious rot caused by income inequality, but also showcases the actual consequences of what executing a violent revolution would entail. The systemic dehumanization and murder of rich people is shown as a negative, actually. Jonathan Chait, a political pundit, put it succinctly, stating the film proposes, quote, the rather modest premise that, irritating though the rich may be, actually killing them and taking all their stuff might be excessive, end quote, while he dismissed the notion that the film is right-wing. I believe that Nolan doesn't put overt social commentary in his movies, and I find the allegation that he is explicitly right-wing in his filmmaking to be rather silly. I imagine he's probably a centrist or center-left person based on his films and his public statements, though I don't think his politics or social commentary is ever a major element in his work. I'm not necessarily a huge Nolan fan, but I find these critiques to be mostly made in bad faith by people who don't take the time to properly engage with his art. This film has had its reception become more complex and mixed over the years, with critiques becoming more common and the film's flaws becoming magnified, with my thoughts towards the film working in reverse of that trend. With each rewatch, I come to appreciate what Nolan was trying to accomplish with this film more and more. Even with this latest rewatch, I have seen my opinion of the film shift even more in a positive direction. It's not that I think that it's a better film on a technical level than The Dark Knight, or that it has become my favorite Batman film or anything, but I have learned to love the movie despite its flaws and faults. The Dark Knight Rises may not be a perfect film, but it is a truly thrilling spectacle, one that must be experienced, not just casually watched. This was the culmination of a lot of hard work by some truly amazingly talented people, and while the film has its flaws, the massive swing it took makes me appreciate its very existence that much more.